Kalen Voss lunged into the path of the blue energy streak, feeling his armor shatter and his chest ignite before he even hit the polished floor. The high balcony of the spire was a blur of white stone and screaming diplomats as the world went dark. If you want to see how a single guard's choice can topple an empire, stay with us as we uncover the secrets of the spire. Now, let's go back to where the betrayal began. 11 days earlier, the station's water recycler had broken for the third time that week. Kalen had spent his shift listening to the rhythmic, annoying drip of a leaky pipe in the lower guard room. A far cry from the celestial heights of the Empress's inner circle, he was a warden of the Aegis, tasked with the physical security of a summit that felt more like a slow-motion car crash than a peace talk. The Obsidian Hegemony was coming, and they weren't bringing gifts. In the spire of Celestiny, whispers travel faster than light, and gossip is a deadlier weapon than an ion lance. Kalen watched the delegates from a dozen systems mingle in the grand hall, their silks trailing over floors polished to a mirror finish. Among them moved a small, hovering medical drone, its chassis a soft, pearl white. It was an encouragement robot, designed to monitor the stress levels of the high-strung negotiators and offer soothing hums or vitamin D mists. Kalen watched it bump gently into the hem of a senator's robe. The senator kicked it away without looking. "Keep your eyes on the perimeter, Voss," a senior warden barked through the comms. Kalen straightened. His gaze drifted to Empress Alara. She stood at the center of the room, a pillar of composure in a sea of frantic ego. She was negotiating with the foreign powers, her voice steady even as the hegemony envoys grew louder, their demands for territorial integration becoming less like requests and more like threats. Kalen noticed the way her hands remained perfectly still, even as the council members behind her shifted and sweated. The tension was a physical weight. It felt like the air was being sucked out of the room, replaced by the ozone scent of high-grade shields and the metallic tang of hidden agendas. Kalen's HUD flickered. A minor anomaly on the south balcony, he moved. Every step felt heavy. It wasn't just the gravity plating. It was the realization that the enemies weren't in the warships above. They were the ones pouring the wine. He saw a server linger too long near the Empress's primary advisor. He saw a councilman's hand tremble as he reached for a data pad. Do you think loyalty is something you're born with, or is it forged in the moment of greatest peril? Join us in the comments and tell us what you'd sacrifice for a leader you believed in. Kalen reached the upper mezzanine just as the summit reached its crescendo. The hegemony envoy had stopped shouting. The silence that followed was worse. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a landslide. Kalen scanned the high balcony, his eyes locking onto a shimmer in the air that shouldn't have been there. The medical bay smelled of ozone and synthetic jasmine. Kalen drifted in a haze of chemical dreams, feeling a strange rhythmic thrumming in his veins that didn't belong to his own heart. When his eyes finally flickered open, the sterile white ceiling was obscured by a face he had only ever seen from 20 paces. Empress Alara was not standing. She was sitting on the edge of the biobed, her regal robes wrinkled. Her hand was pressed firmly against Kalen's bare forearm, her fingers glowing with a soft, pulsing amber light. Kalen tried to speak, but his throat felt like it was filled with dry sand. "Do not move, Warden," she whispered. Her voice lacked its usual icy command. It sounded fragile. "The hegemony lance charred your heart. I am currently the only thing keeping it beating." Kalen realized then what he was witnessing. This was the life bond, a biological tether mentioned only in the oldest archives of her lineage. By touching him, she was threading her own metabolic energy into his failing systems. It was a literal sacrifice of her own vitality to patch his broken cells. Beside the bed, the pearl-white encouragement robot hovered. It was no longer being kicked. Instead, it chirped softly, displaying a steady green pulse line that synced perfectly between the Empress and the guard. A door hissed open. 2 council members stepped in, their faces masks of feigned concern. They spoke of the hegemony fleet arriving in orbit and the necessary marriage alliance to ensure the spire's safety. Kalen watched Ilara's jaw tighten. Through the bond, he felt a spike of her cold, sharp fury. She knew. She didn't look at them. She looked only at Kalen. "The fleet is a distraction," Ilara said, her voice regaining its steel. "My own council paved the way for that assassin. They wanted a martyr, not an empress." The councilman turned pale. They hadn't realized the bond worked both ways. That Kalen's eyes were now her eyes, and her strength was his. 2 days later, the Empress stood before the Hegemony envoy in the charred remains of the balcony. Kalen stood a half-step behind her. He was wrapped in a specialized compression suit, his chest still tender, but his stance was unwavering. The conspirators had been purged, dragged to the lower levels by wardens who finally knew where the rot lay. Ilara didn't offer a hand in marriage. She offered a choice: mutual partnership or a war that would burn the sector. The envoy looked at the Empress, then at the man who had survived an ion blast to the heart, and finally signed the accord. The medical drone hovered near Kalen's shoulder. As the ships began to depart, it hummed a low, satisfied note. The amber glow of the bond had faded from his skin, but the warmth remained, a permanent echo of the day. A throne was saved by a man who refused to move. The encouragement robot bumped against Kalen's hand, its pearl surface cooling as it entered standby mode. Kalen looked at the Empress, seeing the woman behind the crown, and knew their silence was the loudest thing in the room. "What would you do if you discovered your greatest allies were the ones orchestrating your downfall?" We'll be back tomorrow with another tale from the edge of the galaxy.